Hey there friends, Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. And this is a missing persons segment, and I'm glad you're here. I have some cases that are mind blowers. One that took me forever to finally get after appealing for the missing persons report through the sheriff's office. I finally got this one. It's a biggie. So start off with the letters, and there's some really good ones. First of all, I want to talk about mental health. And why do I want to talk about that? Because as we are speaking, Shanghai, China is in a massive lockdown of their city. They're going on 14 days. That's horrendous for the people of Shanghai. And several of you have forwarded me videos. They're some of the most disturbing I've ever seen about the mental health crisis in China. Yeah, it's all related to COVID, according to these reports. And they remind me of what's happening here in the US, but again, our press isn't talking about it. But in China, several news bureaus have talked about the mass number of suicides in China. And some of them have actually shown people in horrendous positions who have killed themselves. And in one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life, of just pure animal abuse, these people that have taken their lives, or the people that have come down with COVID and are going to camps in China, the Chinese authorities have taken their animals and they put them in these bags that are like heavy-duty netting. And they show these bags laying on the sidewalks of the streets, with some animals still alive in these bags, but most of them are dead, beaten to death by Chinese police. If you Google YouTube Chinese animal abuse under COVID, or you go to YouTube and you say Chinese suicides with COVID, there's a multitude of videos. You can see this. It's absolutely unbelievable. On April 11th of this year, CNN showed a story with the Chinese yelling at police that they were starving. And these were people who risked arrest because they could not leave their apartments and their homes. And then some people showed the white tape that is going over the doorways to seal these people in to their homes over COVID. And they said that there's another outbreak there now. But instead of just allowing it to happen, rather than locking down, they decided to lock everybody down. I've seen a lot of things in my life. Seeing the suicides in China and seeing the abuse of the way they killed these animals and just stuffed them in bags and laid them on sidewalks along the street. Absolutely inhumane. To believe that human beings would treat others in this manner, I don't understand it. One thing I do want to show you, and I want to tell you about, is what was given to me, actually made for me, by one of the viewers. This one viewer, who's an absolutely awesome taxidermist, made this plaque, state of Texas, deer horn, and stuffed an absolutely beautiful specimen. He knew I was an outdoorsman, and he sent this to me. And he never said it was okay to say his name, so I don't want to, but He also sent me a series of family photos, and just a great human being. I'm going to stick this up in my office on the wall in appreciation for the absolute artistry that this man has. It was quite unbelievable. I'm always stunned what people will do, and I'm deeply appreciative. I'm honored. Again, I've said before, I don't think I'm anyone special, and anytime anyone does anything for me, even just watching, is a big deal to me. Thank you. So, the National Library of Medicine, May 2021, had an article posted. It said, COVID-19 and suicide, a deadly association. That's by Margarita Abi Zaid Dayu and Gael Richard and Jeffrey Geller. The abstract is, COVID-19 hit the world amidst an unprecedented suicide epidemic in the century. As the world focuses on limiting the spread of the virus and prioritizing acutely medically ill patients, containment measures are not without mental health consequences. Read that again. Containment measures are not without mental health consequences. With rising anxiety and depression, the risk of suicide acutely and in the aftermath of the pandemic also rises. This article aims to shed light on the major public health problem and better understand what factors may create or exacerbate psychiatric symptoms and suicide. We review suicide data predating the pandemic and examine impact of previous epidemics on suicide rates. We then focus on the current pandemic's impacts and world response to COVID-19. We examine how these may lead to increased suicide rates, focusing on the U.S. population. Finally, we offer suggestions on mitigating interventions to curb the impending rise in suicide and resultant increased burden on an already stretched healthcare system. Wow. All evidence shows that our press is purposely hiding certain things from us. We as a country cannot function without an open and honest free press. And I know that there are reporters out there that work for newspapers and things and are watching this right now. And if you're buckling because of who you're paid by, and if you're buckling to tell to not tell the truth because an editor says so, then you're compromising your own personal ethics. And I would implore upon you to leave that organization and get to one where you can tell the truth. We need the freedom of the press. Okay, first letter. First off, I would like to thank all of you for all you do. I watch your videos every week and especially look forward to the factual news segments. It's a good feeling to be part of this village. It is. It's a really good group of people. I keep this as brief as possible. I want to touch on a loss with you. I have watched you mourn the loss of your beautiful son, Ben. I'm sure I speak not just for myself when I say you have my deepest condolences and you have been in many of my prayers. The loss of a child is unfathomable. I'm 41 years old and I live in Alaska. My father was killed in an oil drilling accident when my mother was 8 months pregnant with me. I feel that I was born with a mourning heart. I've had other very significant losses in my life. When you start speaking of getting signs of Ben, or what could be signs in your experiences, I felt so deeply for you. To have a sign is such reassurance for us left behind. You also talked about Leslie Kean's book, which I have not yet read. Several of Leslie Kean's books. I recently watched her series on Netflix. Have you watched it yet? No, I don't get Netflix. I found most of it very interesting. Some was a little out there for me. Leslie Kean is such a special person and I enjoyed listening to her very much. Here's what has come to me. The missing people you have written about the families of these missing people, do they receive signs from their lost loved ones after they are gone? So I talked to a lot of missing people, families, and I've become very close with several. And yes, signs have been given to some of these families. Definitive signs. I know in many of the letters you have read, there is much question about where do these souls go? Do most of them go into heaven? Can you send signals to their family? I hope this isn't something you have already talked about and I missed it. I've just felt compelled to reach out and ask about these families that lose a loved one with no answer. My hope is that they get some kind of sign. I pray that Ben gives you signs. I'm sure that he has and does. God must have needed him for something spectacular. I guess so. Thank you so much again. Keep fighting. You have an army behind you. Thank you. So I've talked about this man before. Alan Adadero lost his son on the Big South Trail in Colorado. Alan and I don't have a brother, but if I had a brother, I'd hope it was Alan. Because I can say that I feel very close to him. And we've talked about so many things together. And he's told me things that happened to him after his son disappeared. And he said, Dave, there are some things that happened that were just completely unexplainable. But were directly related to Jared, his son, disappearing. I've said this before and I'll say it again. One day, Ben decided we were going to do films together. Videos about missing people. And the first one we thought about was Alan and Jared. So we went to the spot where Jared's remains, the minuscule remains, were found. And I said, when I put down my backpack, I looked at the ground. There's a bunch of granite everywhere. And laying on the ground where I was putting my backpack was a key, or a key ring. And at the end of the key ring was a Rubik's Cube, a silver and black Rubik's Cube. And I thought, how bizarre is that? I still have it. It's very small, maybe about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And I said, man, come here, look at this. He said, wow, way up here in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, we were way off trail in the middle of nowhere. A few days later, I met with Alan, having lunch, and I showed him the cube. He looked at me and goes, hey Dave, you know what Jared's favorite team was? I said, no. He says, it's the Oakland Raiders. And Dave, what color is that cube? I said, silver and black. He goes, imagine that. Yeah, imagine that. I got tears in my eyes. In front of Alan, I said, I can't believe that. And he goes, yeah. He goes, Jared's done other things like that. But, yeah, some families are touched by their loved ones in some ways, and some probably are, and they don't want to talk about it, and that's their personal thing, and I get it. So thanks for that letter. Someone out there, one of you, sent me from the North Carolina Department of Fish and Game was this. CWD, chronic wasting disease, confirmed in North Carolina. This was on April 8th, 2022. A sample from a hunter harvested white-tailed deer in Yadkin County has tested positive for chronic wasting disease. This is the first detected case of CWD in North Carolina, and it's very bad news. However, the Wildlife Commission has been preparing for CWD for decades and immediately activated its CWD response plan, which was attached in their flyer, which I read. It goes on to say the agency's goal is to protect North Carolina deer herd and deer hunting culture while working to slow the spread of CWD. Did you catch that? The agency's goal is to protect North Carolina's deer herd and deer hunting culture while working to slow the spread of COVID, of CWD. Didn't say remove it. It didn't say to stop it. Slow the spread. A press release issued last week stated that to achieve this goal, the agency will work with constituents and partners to implement the response plan and refine the long-term deer management strategy. So I read their response plan, just like every other state, nothing really different. But this is what initial actions they had. Wildlife law enforcement officers will immediately begin securing access to private and public lands within the area. They will coordinate with posting of notification signs along roadways entering the area. They will conduct an evaluation of possible environmental contamination from the positive carcass or high-risk carcass parts, and if necessary and possible, minimize the likelihood that the COVIDs will acquire CWD from the affected environment. That's it. Friends, I've said to you many times, I've read every state's response plan that I can find. Many don't post it. They're all like this. They have no way to stop this. They don't. And it's going to affect many, many deer, elk, mink, etc. in our environment. And all infected animals will die. It's 100% fatal. It's horrible. And when they say North Carolina has their first confirmed case, friends, I can almost guarantee it's all over that state right now. Yeah. Because just because you found one doesn't mean that it's not everywhere. And usually when you find one, there's 10 more in that infected herd or nearby. And when another deer grazes over the land where one of the other deer has eaten, left their saliva, urinated, etc., it's there. Because that's the way it's transmitted. Of everything in life, CWD is one thing that always is on my mind. It always bothers me. So, next letter. Hello, people. I've watched us make incremental changes in the way we live. I realize much of it was not for our benefit. Nixon taking us off the gold standard. Money is then printed with nothing on back of it to back it up. The creation of the Federal Reserve. This has been covered at length by much people more smarter than I, so I won't dwell on that. Of course, there were changes before that, probably 100 years earlier. The Industrial Revolution, besides making crooks like Rockefeller, Morgan, and Carnegie extremely wealthy, also began reducing the number of people farming. I suppose living in the big city, working in the mills and factories of the day was much more interesting than growing food. But that was just the first step. Getting people used to the idea of the government taking care of them began during the Great Depression, also engineered, and FDR took full advantage of it. Don't forget, he was from a banking family. Before that, people don't care for themselves and their family. But that creates a spirit of independence. Can't have that. Starting in the late 40s after World War II, more women were in the workforce. I witnessed some changes even as a child. I thought were not good ideas. I was one of 2 children at my schools whose mother worked outside the home. Mine at night. It does train you to be pretty self-sufficient, but it also loosens those family ties that I believe are the bedrock of our society. And I believe that as well. A strong family bond with kids and a mom and a dad in the house together every night is huge for the benefit of the children. And if I could say so, the benefit of the parents too. If you love your kids, you want to see them every night. One of the first things I questioned as a child was the hybridization of seeds and plants. the effort to produce some fruits like grapes and watermelon that were seedless. Why? People were too lazy to spit out the seeds? Already at 10, I was a seed saver. I realized that we might not be able to plant and grow our own food one day. If this continued, by junior high, I was watching the government pay farmers not to plant some of their fields. Why? Even more appalling were the animals slaughtered, the milk dumped, and the grains destroyed. When there were people in the world starving, we couldn't find a way to get the food to. Even people in our own country who were getting hungry. I thought the government wanted to take care of citizens. Why were these things being done? To regulate prices, of course. Paying attention? I wanted farmers over the years being persuaded to buy hybrid seeds, chemical fertilizer, and poisonous pesticides. The reason given was, you will get a lot more yield. The seeds are more pest resistant. Then why would they need Roundup? Finally, they were sold GMO seeds. Better living through chemistry? Hardly. How many farmers have died of cancer? Is that what David Icke calls a totalitarian tiptoe? I noticed his products, once handcrafted, were mass-produced. They lost their quality and longevity. It wasn't your imagination that your second-hand washer or refrigerator didn't work as well as long as the first ones you bought. I was amused after microwaves hit the market to watch as the manufacturers realized that plastic dishes they made to use in them lasted way too long. The next ones were nowhere near as good a quality. Has anyone else noticed the move away from cars that are easily kept operational by just about any shade tree mechanic to be replaced by more complicated vehicles? A sensor now for every function. Batteries are stored under the floor in the back seat. Starters you have to take half of the front vehicle apart to get to. None of these things were accidental. At the same time, we were presented with an agency after agency created to help those on the economic button. I have no problem with giving someone a helping hand when they are needed in real need, especially through no fault of their own. But realize you're being set up to become a permanent recipient of government largesse. My daughter and I had the same situation happen to us 2 decades apart. When she, at 5, had to have surgery, I wasn't able to work for nearly 2 years. I went on to something called ADC, Aid to Dependent Children. As soon as I was able, I went back to work and called DHS to let them know I wouldn't need their assistance anymore and thank them for the help when I needed it. I was chastised for going back to work. I might not be able to get their help again. There might not be any place for me, and so on and so on. I couldn't figure out why she was angry at me until I realized their funding likely was dependent on the head count. My daughter experienced the same thing when the plant where she worked closed. When she was able to find work again after a short time and called and let the agency know, the woman actually screamed at her and told her they couldn't help her again. People aren't meant to be self-sufficient. Some want us completely dependent on them for all of their needs. Does that sound like Agenda 2130 to anyone else? Look it up. For most of our history, even people who lived in towns and gardens, maybe a grape arbor or a fruit tree or two, they were still local grain mills where farmers could sell their grain and people could buy it there. You could also buy meat, eggs, and honey from local growers instead of halfway across the country. On more and more from another country. When you allow yourself to become dependent on those imports of any kind, what happens when the spigot runs dry? The ships start coming. The trucks grind to a halt due to overregulation and ever-increasing fuel prices. Most stores have a 3 or 4 day inventory of the majority of their products. What happens when those shelves aren't restocked? Let me stop there. I told you about China having this big lockdown right now. Well, part of that story is there are ships lined up at the ports, ready to load up and unload. But nothing's happening. Now, it may not have hit you yet. Oh, it's going to hit you. It's going to hit us hard. It's going to be another supply chain huge issue. Now we have several disasters all hitting us at once. Higher fuel prices, lack of fertilizer, lack of seeds, even GMOs. Parts and components of all kinds of things we have gotten used to no longer come in from China or take a long time to get here, because some geniuses decided it would be a great idea to close up our factories and move them offshore. A guy who was retiring from our local electric company told my husband that by summer our electric bill will double, maybe triple. Why? Because the government won't allow the company to use coal to generate electricity any longer. They have to switch over to natural gas. Someone explained to me where all the coal is going that I see go past us every day. 4 to 6 trains. Each train is made of 100 coal cars, each car carrying 100 tons of coal. It's going somewhere. My guess it would be China. This is all part of their plan. I knew where we were headed when I heard the globalist Maurice Strong at a UN World Conference in Rio in '92 say, quote, "The only country standing in the way of our one world government is the United States. We need to turn it into a third world country, and we can do it." End of quotes. It has taken the globalists longer than they wanted, but I would say they have been pretty successful. And there is the smart mindset of somebody who really wants to change things for the bad, but it's patient, and it's from the inside. They don't want to do it tomorrow. They'll let us kill ourselves from the inside. So, are we doomed? I don't think so. It may not be as easy or a quick fix, but I think we can make changes that will lighten the burden that they're trying to inflict on us. Like General Flynn says, it begins where you live. Pay attention to your state, county, and local politicians and school board members. I notified our city council that I'd be looking for any signs that they were on board with Agenda 21 and 30, and I knew what to look for. Then look for the ways to be able to live as self-sufficient as possible. That will vary with you where you live. If you can't move out of a large city, God help you. Stop there. I don't live in a big city because I believe that that is where bad things will start. Remember, big cities, big gangs. Gangs have guns. They don't follow any laws. If you look at some cities where crime is running rampant, it's running rampant because the gangs are running the streets. They aren't being prosecuted like they were before. They're being released. Now, if things seriously deteriorate, the worst place you want to be is in a city. And that's why I'm where I'm at. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but I do feel much safer up here because I'm surrounded by people with a similar mindset. Won't put up with garbage, won't put up with problems. And everyone around here carries guns. So if you're going to come up to Montana and you're going to try to cause a problem, the sheriffs up here aren't going to put up with it. Remember what I said. I'll remind you again. A sheriff is not beholden to politicians. A police chief is. A police chief is hired by politicians. A sheriff is not. In Montana, the sheriffs really rule most of Montana. And then in some of the bigger cities, they have police chiefs. Small town America will be better off. Most people can grow at least some food in their yards. I have at least 30 herbs for cooking and healing, a small garden for mostly root vegetables, and a raised garden for greens and tomatoes. That's smart. If you can, get a greenhouse. Pots of blueberries and a strawberry patch and rhubarb. Also have the equipment to grow food in the basement should that become necessary. This isn't bad for a small corner lot. Plus you can hide some vegetables in amongst your flower beds if needed. I sat one day and made a game out of it. What would I need or wish for if EMPs took us back to the 1850s? It was a very long list, but I've managed to acquire most of it, including a treadle sewing machine, I pay attention to the Amish. Some of them do use gas for their appliances, but no electricity. That is not true anymore. Actually, I was on an Amish site a couple of months ago, and I was talking to the men there, stellar guys, and they're using electric drills and electric hammers. He says, hey, we have to keep up. And our elders have said we have to go, and we have to use these electric things. I said, wow, fascinating. They have heritage seeds to replant and use draft horses to pull their plows for planting their crops. And they use the fertilizer that God provided, seasoned manure. While that might not be feasible for huge, big ag farms, could most manage by breaking up those monster fields into smaller plots like they used to farm? Also, by eliminating the middleman, farmers could sell it directly to consumers. People could revive some of the dormant grain mills around the country. Bartering could become a way of life again. Can we do it? I think so. Of course, we'd be fighting the government every step of the way, and I already have been. Now, you know the reason why it is illegal in Colorado to collect rainwater? Some cities and towns have outlawed gardens on private property. In some places, they are making farmers' markets so overregulated, people have stopped selling that way. But I'm thinking when the S**T really hits the fan, they're going to be much too busy trying to survive themselves. They won't have as much time or clout to annoy us. Doing everything we can try to do to survive is better than sitting in our homes, hungry, cold, and waiting for the city hordes to come raiding. Oh yes, make sure you can defend yourself and your family and your property. Even the Amish, as religious as they are allowed self-defense. I made sure to buy heritage seeds that, besides the food grown, will reproduce seeds every year. And that's important, folks. Many of the fruits and vegetables we eat today don't have seeds. Yeah, it's bizarre. So you need to have a plant that reproduces seeds for the following season. And I brought enough to plant several community gardens. Rather than robbing your neighbors if times get tough, let's prepare to have enough necessities to share and barter with. And don't forget the elderly. I discovered during a time of caring for the elderly and doing hospice work that the elderly have extensive knowledge and experience in living with little. Many lived through the Great Depression, useless haters, hardly. In spite of the globalists trying to kill us off, as many of the elderly in the last 2 years and their poison jabs, and in order to save Social Security, they robbed the end user with their slush fund. We can make sure our elderly are cared for. Each of us needs to do as much as we can to provide for our families, extend that help to our neighbors, and defend ourselves from anyone determined to take that we have. We can come through any hard times, but now is the time to prepare, learn survival skills, put supplies away, think about what you need in a grid-down situation and acquire those things as you need. If the worst doesn't happen, no big deal. We will use most of it, and we will have learned to take care of ourselves and never again allow any government to care for all of our needs. If you have any doubts about that, just ask the American Indians how that worked out for them. I'll say this again, and I've said it almost every week for the last month. What you need to do is you need to group up with your neighborhood, your street, your court, but they have to be close. Because in a real dire situation, you're not going to leave your house. Because if you ever do, you may not be there when you get back. Because remember, the lawlessness that'll exist, it will be severe. And you have to have that mindset of survival. And that's not easy for some people. It's not going to be a pretty place if we get there. But again, supply chains are getting worse. I was just in the store today and several shelves were pretty barren. So I think it's coming. And remember toilet paper and paper in general? How we had a tough time with those several months ago? I don't know what it's going to be this time, but I can tell you that food prices are going through the roof. And the inflation index just took a giant leap again. and I don't see anyone doing anything about it. Controlled destruction. Next letter. By the way, I thought that letter was stellar. Thank you. Dave, I've been a villager for years, although when we left the city 4 years ago and moved off-grid into a homemade yurt, we stopped watching videos altogether because phone data was scarce. But at the time, we had just bought 2 of your books, Off the Grid and Hunters, Missing 411 Off the Grid and Missing 411 Hunters. And I was freaked out daily by reading it while all alone in the middle of the woods with barely anything separating us from the outside world. Then, first summer for 3 nights in a row, we got woken up by strange animal sounds just outside the reach of our flashlight beams in the woods. The first night it was a deer about 20 yards away, just hissing but not moving. It stayed there hissing, it would seem like forever. The second night it was the sound of a hare or something similar squealing over and over at a spot behind the yurt about 10 or 15 yards into the woods. I actually went out. My partner was still asleep and looked into the woods and considered going in to look into it, but your books were fresh in my mind and I thought, what if this is a decoy? Never, ever do that. Never leave your tent or your cabin and walk into the woods to check a sound unless you're with somebody else who's armed, or you are armed with somebody else. Never go alone. On the third night, my partner woke up in the early morning hours to a sound moving around the yurt. He said it sounded like when a speaker is on but there is no input plugged into it, like a sort of vibration or low humming. And it was bobbing up and down on one side of the yurt a few feet off the ground. He said it did that for a few minutes and then the whole event stopped. I was sound asleep and I never woke up. I'm a sensitive, if you could call it that, and my life is literally filled with those kind of events, to the point where I'm completely desensitized to it. To me, those things are completely normal and all occur very often. I've seen a see-through humanoid twice in the same summer when I was younger, although it was in the suburbs. I've also seen people step into darkness or behind a structure and just never re-emerge. We were spirits that I was able to see at the time. Were they travelers who were cloaked to the people standing closer to them, but somehow from the angle I was standing at, I was only able to see them for a brief moment? I've seen quite a few UFOs in my past years, and all I got to say is if you want to spot one, all you need to do is point your camera up and start taking pictures. They are there. They are everywhere. The more you start seeing them, the more they seem to appear. Sometimes you have to play with the picture zoom or brightness to see them properly, but you will always be able to spot a few. I did that a few years ago in the early morning hours before work. It was my obsession. There was more and more every day, mostly white orbs, but sometimes different ones, and my conclusion on the matter was that it was the same in nature as spiritual phenomena in the sense that it was more you pay attention to it, the more it is drawn to you. Needless to say, as I got closer and freakier in nature, it freaked me again and the hell out, and I stopped taking those pics. I'm thinking about starting again because I'm in a UFO hotspot here in the Laurentians, also surrounded by granite, and I know there are probably tons of them out there and I can see them on a monthly basis. Well, made this as short as I could, considering I could have done a lot more and said a lot more. Thank you for all your hard work you do, and don't give up. I know you inspire a lot of people and a lot of us look up to you. You are a pillar of the community. I know sometimes it might be hard to always be the one standing strong, but you won't choose our place in this life. It is given to us according to our strengths. Stay strong. Thank you. So, I have a very good friend. Very smart man. And he lives in a city. And I've seen his footage that he takes with his camera. And it's phenomenal. And he told me, he said, Dave, if you concentrate, if you meditate, that you want these UFOs, beings, whatever they are, meditate to them, that you want them to make an appearance. He says, in a percentage of the time, I can get them to come and show up. He showed me 3 or 4 of the videos he took. And you could see the the pole in his backyard, the telephone pole, and you could see the houses, and you could see this thing flying up in the sky above multiple times. I think there's something to it. Now, I'm not really interested in doing that, but I'd be with him and I'd watch while he calls them in. I think it's pretty fascinating. So on to the stories. And we have a couple humdingers tonight. First case, U.S. Forest Service Inspector Louis Margolin, 27 years old, missing June 19th, 1914. Louis was raised in New York City with his mom, his dad, and his brother. He was described as brilliant. He went to Harvard, got a degree, and then he went to Cornell University and learned to be an outdoorsman or a forestry official. Learn the outdoors, plants, trees. Learn to be a professional. So he left, became an inspector for the Forest Service, which wasn't called the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service at the time. And in June 8th, 1914, he was assigned to go to the north coast of California, where there's some big redwoods. And his specialty was eucalyptus trees, and he had written an academic paper about them. And he did his trip up in Northern California, and then he came down into the mountains near Fresno, California, the Sierra Nevada mountains. And he went to the headquarters of the Forest Service at Dinkey Creek. Now, friends, when I heard Dinkey Creek, I sat up straight and I started paying attention. Because Dinkey Creek is a cluster zone of missing people, and darn if I know why. I'm not sure what it is about that area, but there's a lot of people missing there. So I started paying attention. So this 15th he was there, he met with a bunch of people, and on June 19th, he was assigned to take a hike from Dinkey Creek Ranger Station to Long Cabin Meadow. Now first, let me tell you, Louis was an outdoorsman to the max. Highly educated, brilliant, athletic, smart. The kind of guy the Forest Service was very lucky to have. He probably should have been in an educational institution teaching us, but that wasn't it. So, Louis left on the 19th, morning hours, and he took off, going to see some tree cutters. Now I'm going to give you an overview of really what's going on here. So, this is Fresno, California right here. This was where he departed from the Dinkey Creek Ranger Station. Here's Yosemite National Park, Kings Canyon National Park, and Sequoia National Park. They surround this Dinkey Creek area. This is not National Park right here, but you're surrounded by them. Got it? All right. Now here's a kind of an updated, up-close map of this Dinkey Creek area. This is where he departed from. And this is where he was supposedly, some materials of him were found that I'll explain. So the day he left, June 19th, there was a massive electrical storm that was talked about extensively. And he was supposed to show up that next day. He never did show up at this camp. But witnesses reported seeing him on June 20th on a ridge high above Dinkey Creek. Well, when he didn't arrive at the camp, his manager called in 100 men, ranchers, Forest Service personnel, and started searching. And they were searching everywhere. And there were a lot of articles for 1914 about this. And the first theory that was thrown out, or that was actually entertained, was that they thought he was walking through the woods and a tree fell on him. I read that and I thought, how gullible do they think people are? They think trees just fall over everywhere in the woods? I've never seen a tree fall over in the woods, and I've been in the woods for thousands of hours. But I gotta say that when I lived in San Jose, I had a friend, and his family lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And his mom woke up one morning to take a walk, and a tree fell over and killed her. So I understand it does happen. But the other theory was he drowned in Dinkey Creek, which was ridiculous because he was a seasoned outdoorsman and he knew his way around. He knew the dangers, etc. Another one was that he fell off a cliff. But there was never any evidence of any of this. So the first search and rescue lasted 10 days. They didn't find anything. Nothing. They were astounded. Then there was a second search and rescue in the Dinkey Creek area, and they started dragging the creek. And on July 14th, they pulled in a shirt. And in the pocket of the shirt was a diary and a small knife. Well, the diary belonged to Lewis. And the top two buttons on the shirt were unbuttoned, and then the rest of the buttons on the shirt appeared to be torn off. The last entry in the book was June 16th. I remember he left on June 19th. There's a lot of thought about why or what might have happened, and his boss said that the papers were torn out of the book because he thought Lewis used them to start a fire, that he was lost, he was off trail, something. Again, no evidence of that. So the river was dragged in that area for 5 days. They never found anything. And it's not a river, it's a creek. Dinkey Creek. Well, Lewis's parents in New York posted $1,000 reward. And for 1914, that was a lot of money. And they were hoping that other people were going to go out and search and keep his case alive. There were numerous other searches. He wasn't found, which was puzzling at best. The distance from where he departed to where he eventually, somebody found his shirt, was about 12 miles. This was called Ross Crossing. Now, in this case, water was everywhere. He was next to it. He was hiking and using Dinkey Creek as a way to get from point to point. Granite is everywhere in this part of the Sierras. They had a weather event, electrical storm. In fact, the article said it wiped out any tracks that they thought they could have followed. He was a brilliant individual, and he was never found. Now, articles at the time said that it was thought he drowned somehow in Dinkey Creek. They didn't know how, they didn't know where he went in. They were baffled that they never found a body. And at that place at Ross Crossing, in a piece of granite, a large granite boulder, they put this plaque. And it said, "To remember Louis Margolin, who lost his life June 20th, 1914, near this spot in the line of duty." And this was a duplicate of his Forest Service badge. I'd like to go back there and see if it's still there. I doubt it. But I thought it was a nice gesture by the Forest Service. Do I think Lewis was in the creek? No. I think the Forest Service would have found him. This isn't like it's a huge river. This is a creek, Dinkey Creek. And the other thing about this area, there's a cluster of missing people around this area that took a large portion of several books that I've written. And I have written about this area time and time again, a variety of disappearances that are absolutely baffling. There was one person in 1914 that shouldn't have disappeared based on his experience in the outdoors and his educational level, Louis Margolin. This is going to be a case you won't hear about anyplace else. I've never heard about it anywhere else until I found it. Rest in peace, Louis. The next case, I heard about this case many years ago. And I applied through the Chelan, C-H-E-L-A-N, Chelan County Sheriff's Office in Washington to get copies of their missing person report. And Washington has a mandatory disclosure law. And the clerk told me, Dave, you're going to have to wait, I think they said 15 days, because it's a policy of our sheriff to send the family a notification that you're requesting documents and for them to get a court order to stop you from getting them. We always give the family the right to do that. I thought, I've never heard of this. Make a long story short, the family didn't intercede, and I got this extensive package of reports on this case. And I think it's important that you understand the way I'm going to explain this to you. So first of all, this is the victim of this incident, Richard Lee. Richard, 47 years old, disappeared September 14th, 2004, Colchuck Lake, Washington. 6 foot, 200 pounds. He was from Hobart, Washington. He was a computer analyst for Boeing. I read that and I thought, well, that's pretty odd, because I've written about several people who have disappeared working for Boeing. He was married. He had kids. His wife's name was Yvonne. And he was formerly a lumberjack, but he was now a computer analyst. He knew the outdoors very well. He used to camp in the outdoors all the time when he was younger. As he got older, he didn't camp as much as he used to. He was known to always like being off trail and didn't like camping around people. His wife had said at times he had gotten depressed about his job at Boeing, but he wasn't a depressed type person. He was quiet, liked to keep to himself. Well, he told his wife and told his family that he was going to go backpacking for 3 days. And on September 18th, he packed his stuff. On the 19th, he stopped by a few stores, got some fuel, camping fuel, and some other things. And on the 19th, he left. And he drove about 2 hours. So, this is Seattle. This is the Stewart Lake and Colchuck Lake trailhead. This would have been the quickest route he could have taken, a little over 2 hours. And this area of Washington has a lot of disappearances. Let me just say that. Very unusual place. So, at about 11:31 that morning, calls his wife and he tells her that he's on the ridge above Colchuck Lake. Everything's good. He's off trail. He's hiking around. Okay, good. He also told her that his compass wasn't working, but that he had a backup one on his watch that he was going to use. Well, he was supposed to be home on the 15th or on the 12th. Correct that. He's missing September 14th, 2004. That's when he was reported. Well, what happened was he was supposed to be home on the 12th. His wife thought maybe he was late getting out, so she waited. Late on the 13th, she calls search and rescue. On September 14th, they found his green Ford Explorer at the Stewart Lake trailhead. Probably where it should have been if he was going into Colchuck Lake. Now, once a deputy finds a car at a location and somebody's reported missing, deputies usually don't have the authority to call and search and rescue. It's usually the job of a supervisor. And what they're doing is they're calling in people, just like you and me, who have certifications in search and rescue that we went out and got on our own, and we're volunteering to search. So the sergeant calls a search and rescue coordinator. That coordinator puts out a call to his people. Says, hey, we have a search and rescue that we need immediate assistance with. We're going to meet at the trailhead tomorrow morning at blah, blah, blah time. Be there if you can. That's kind of how it gets started. Well, on the 15th, they start early in the morning, and the county sheriff has his deputies there, and he's calling in search and rescue assistance from multiple other counties. And they're interviewing people coming off the trail to see if they saw Richard. They show him a picture. Nobody had seen him. Well, and then they bring in helicopters, ground teams, equestrians, and they're looking all over. They send 3 teams to Stewart Lake and 3 teams to Colchuck Lake because they're not 100% sure where he's going to be at. So he parks his car here. And then this is about 2.5 miles into here, about 2 miles between the lakes. And so they send 3 teams here and 3 teams there. And they're not finding anything. And they're getting frustrated because they know he's there. His car's there. So where's his campsite? Well, they're asking a lot of good questions. So after a 5-day search, they don't find anything. They call off the SAR. But they leave posters up saying that somebody's missing in this area, Colchuck Lake or Stewart Lake, and if you see anything to notify the sheriff. September 28th. Remember, he disappears September 14th. September 28th, a hiker finds a campsite off trail on the south side of Colchuck Lake in an area that was closed. And he calls the Chelan County Sheriff, gives the GPS coordinates and explains what he finds. And on the next day, the sheriff sends a team into there to look. They find an unusual sight. They find a camp with a tent, sleeping bags, off trail on a small hill in a grove of trees. And they brought along 2 canine teams. And from there, they have his scent, and they're going to hopefully pick up a trail from there to look for him. Well, they find a FlyQuest tent, a Wenger sleeping bag, car keys, toothbrush, socks, and they find food in a bear container pulled up into a tree. Exactly what you should be doing. Richard did the right thing. Well, two SAR members spent the night at this campsite. Canines didn't pick up any scent trail leaving the area. It snowed off and on during this search and rescue. The campsite of Richard was right near the lake, but it was in a very odd location. So, this is Colchuck Lake. On the south side, if you look at it from an aerial view, look up Colchuck Lake, by the way, it's absolutely gorgeous. And on the south side, there's a huge boulder field. And right off the boulder field is the campsite where he was at in the trees, in an area that was closed. The thought was that maybe he got trapped in that boulder field. So they put canines through it, they searched it from the air, they searched it from the ground, didn't find anything. Well, this is in a cluster of area of people who have disappeared, by the way. Tons of granite everywhere. Canines couldn't pick up a scent. He wasn't found. What happened to Richard? Well, the deputies took pictures of the campsite and the equipment, and Yvonne confirmed that was his equipment. There was a backpack there, but the day pack was gone. A water bottle was gone. And the thought was he took a day hike somewhere from that campsite. But what made it really difficult was that Richard was known to hike off trail. So as I've told you many times, that if you go off trail and you break your leg, you may die right there. On that spot you broke your leg. Because as somebody who's broke my right leg and my left leg at different times, the pain on the first time I broke my leg was unbelievable. I wasn't going anywhere. Second time, I was with Angie, and Angie said, well, you either broke it or you blew the tendons. And the doctor even said, well, you've been walking on it, so you couldn't have broke it. Well, yeah, I broke it. So, kind of depends on the break. And you think, oh yeah, I could get out. No. The first time I broke it, you're not moving anywhere. If you can imagine the worst pain times 10 in your life, that's about how bad it was. So, you break your leg off trail, you could be done for your life. So what do? That's why you always carry a personal locator beacon. Now Richard did a lot of things right. He told his wife where he was going, told her where he was going to be camped, told her when he was going to be back. Those are all good. But when you don't say what you're doing or where you're going during the day, that's rough. That's really rough. So, because they really didn't know where, there was a wide area to search between Stewart Lake, Colchuck Lake, and there's an area there when you look at it from the air, from Google Earth. The area fits exactly with areas where a lot of people disappear. High alpine lakes, many lakes in the area. For some reason, that's the combination that seems to work a lot. But Richard, at 47 years old, was in good health. Probably didn't have a medical emergency. But after 17 years, him not being found, it's pretty unusual, friends. Pretty unusual. So there you have it. Two fascinating cases. Richard Lee, 47 years old, Colchuck Lake, Washington, and Lewis Margolin, Dinkey Creek, California, June 19th, 1914, 27 years old. I appreciate you being here. Please give me a thumbs up if you like the segment. Please repost this on social media. You can follow me on Twitter at David Paulides, Paulides at CanAm Missing. You can email me at canammissing.com, like Canadian American, canammissing.com. You can also, on this link, there's going to be a list of the movies I made, Missing 411 and Missing 411 The Hunted. Still available on Amazon. They reached the top echelon of documentaries for each year. Very proud of that. So watch the movies. And if you're a member of Hulu, I think one of them is still on Hulu. Tell your friends about them. Sit down and watch them as a family because they're good. And for the umpteenth time, be a good person in this world. Do something for someone somewhere. And remember, get together with your neighbors, break the ice, have them over for some kind of social, maybe a buffet dinner, and get the talk going about getting a group together to support themselves during these times. It will help. Thanks. One more time. Beautiful job. Thank you very much. Have a safe week. Love your family. Make sure you talk to your kids, your loved ones. Let them know you're alive and you're doing well. because they will appreciate it like I do. Paulides out.